Black history, Africa history, DORE NUMA, the first 419 in the history of Nigeria. It was this Itsekiri man who as an agent first leased Warri City lands to the British government in 1908, from Ogbi Iho and Agbasa lands. But was DORE NUMA a native of Warri City? No. He was a native of Odogene village in the Benin River. He was approached as an agent, not the owner. But most of the lands he leased resulted into court cases, because he claimed them to be Olu lands. This was because there was no Olu then, and he was appointed by the British as a warrant chief to represent the Itsekiri people since there was no Olu. This he did so that he could collect all the proceeds of the leases into his pocket. All the lands he leased, whether Urhobo, Ijaw, or Itsekiri lands, ended up in court cases as the real owners challenged him that the lands were not Olu lands. He leased Ogbi Ijo lands, Ijaw. He leased Agbasa lands, Urhobo. He leased Ogidigben lands, Itsekiri. He leased Sapel lands, Urhobo. He leased Ogara lands, Urhobo. When he was alive, he did not lose any case. Why? Because he was power exemplified in the Warri province, later Delta province. He was the paramount chief of the Warri province, the last person you meet before you get to the resident British. He was the executive traditional head. He was the head of the Warri Native Court of Appeal, in other words, the chief judge of the state in customary and land matters. He was also a lawmaker. He was the only member in the whole of the South that was a member of the Nigerian National Council of 1914, formed by Lord Lugard. So he was a chief judge, a federal minister, a governor, and a parliamentarian. And most of these appointments came directly from England, for he was a recipient of the King's Medal in 1907. He was given this position because he helped betrayed Nana in 1894, by showing the British a secret route to enter Ebrahimi. He also did that against Oba Ovan Ranwin in 1897. He was able to win all these cases, because he was dealing with a population that was highly illiterate. When he knows that he would lose a case, he will opt to use legal technicalities made by the rules of court, which he knows very well but which his victims did not know. 1. How come every piece of land he leased for the British, whether Urhobo, Ijaw or Itsekiri, as Olu land, ended up as a court case? 2. How come he did not lose any of the court cases when he was alive, but his successors from Jinua too lost all the lands in the same court case, except the Agbasa lands, which even Parliament had to intervene to remedy? In 1941, Ogara recovered their lands using the courts. In 1942, Sapel recovered their lands using the courts. Now see how selfish this man could be. He went to court claiming that he leased the lands as Olu lands, and because he occupies the office of the Olu, he should take the proceeds. But the blood descendants of the Olu, led by Denido and William Moore, sued that if the lands were Olu lands, then the proceeds ought to be given to the blood descendants of the Olu and not a British appointed warrant chief like him. DORE NUMA argued that the money from the lease belonged to the office of the Olu and not the person of the Olu. He won them down to the Supreme Court. But the descendants of the Olu were also crafty and cunning. Seeing that the money belonged to the office of the Olu as decreed by the courts, they quickly wrote to the government that they have decided to crown an Olu for themselves after 88 years of interregnum, and needed that money to build a new palace for the incoming Olu in Ode Itsekiri. At last the British accepted the superior logic. DORE had been cornered. The British had no choice and asked DORE NUMA to stop forthwith, using the full funds. He should keep 1/6 for himself, and pay 5/6 into the Olu Trust Fund. That was a big blow to him, and he never forgave the Itsekiris for that. Why, you may ask? Because immediately he got a court judgment against the Agbasa Urhobo people, on fraudulent technical ground that they were customary tenants to the Jakiris, the Jikris of Okare. Took the Oku Magbar family to court, being that they are Urhobos. They claimed that by that Agbasa judgment, the Urhobos in Okare were tenants to the Jakiris and must pay them rents. Surprisingly, the court of first instance gave the Jakiris victory, using the Ogagir versus DORE NUMA as in authority. But the Oku Magbar family appealed to the appeal court headed by DORE NUMA himself, a court in which he presided. But DORE NUMA shocked his own Jakiris to their bone marrow by paying them back for removing food from his mouth. So in the 1927 case of Nikoro versus Oku Magbar, Chief DORE NUMA gave the historic judgment that, and quote, the Urhobos and the Jakiris have been living together for centuries, without one paying rent to the other, and I cannot hold so now, end quote. This controversial man died in 1932. Subscribe for more.